My husband lived a double life. After his death, he left for me, a mistress with a child, debts and crime problems, and I had to handle them all. Hello everyone, I'm Sophia. I've turned to this forum not because I have a heartwarming story to tell, but because I'm living a reality I never imagined could be mine. It's one filled with deception, betrayal, and a legal nightmare that seems straight out of a dramatic thriller, except it's my life. Up until a few months ago, I thought I was married to the love of my life, Dylan. We had our ups and downs, sure, but I believed we shared an understanding, a partnership that was meant to last a lifetime. That illusion shattered completely when I discovered Dylan was having an affair. The pain of that betrayal was sharp, but what followed turned my entire world upside down. The real bombshell dropped when Dylan died unexpectedly in a car accident. The man I mourned was not the man I married. At his wake, hidden truths surfaced like ghosts from the shadows, debts, lies, and a whole second life complete with another family, all revealed in the cruel aftermath of his death. As if that wasn't enough, I soon found myself entangled in a web of his illegal activities that he had kept hidden under the guise of a normal business. Now, I'm fighting a battle on all fronts, grappling with my grief, dealing with Dylan's tangled legacy, facing a woman who shares my disillusionment, but also views me as an adversary, and struggling to salvage what remains of my peace and security. This isn't just a story about coping with death. It's about confronting a reality where everything I knew about my life was a lie. I'm here to share my journey, as painful as it is, hoping to find some semblance of understanding, or perhaps just to let out the storm that's been raging inside me. The day I found out about Dylan's accident was surreal. One moment I was sorting through the remnants of our shared life, deciding what to keep and what to discard, still reeling from the discovery of his affair. The next, I was receiving a call that he was gone, killed instantly in a collision. The shock was paralyzing. It felt like the ground beneath me had given way. I was already mourning the man I thought I knew, and now I had to mourn him all over again, this time forever. In the days that followed, as I prepared for the wake and handled the immediate aftermath, the facade of Dylan's life began to crumble. While searching through his personal documents to find his will and insurance papers, I stumbled upon a series of letters and receipts that hinted at something far more complex and disturbing than simple infidelity. There were payments for a child's schooling, medical bills, and a second mortgage for a house I knew nothing about. The full scope of the betrayal began to take shape when I met Claire. She approached me at the wake, a woman about my age, holding the hand of a young boy who bore a striking resemblance to Dylan. The introduction was heart-wrenching and awkward. "I'm Claire," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And this is Ethan, Dylan's son." The words hit me like a physical blow. Here was the living proof of my husband's double life. Claire and I agreed to meet a few days later in a more private setting, away from the prying eyes of mutual friends and family. We sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop, two women betrayed by the same man, now linked by his deception. She shared her story, how she had met Dylan during a business conference 5 years ago, how they fell in love, believing he was separated and in the process of divorcing. He had woven a complex web of lies, each designed to keep his two families apart, yet cared for. Listening to Claire, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and an unexpected surge of empathy. Like me, she was a victim of Dylan's lies. She hadn't known about me any more than I had known about her. Our meeting ended with an uneasy alliance formed out of our mutual connection to Dylan and the need to sort out the mess he left behind, especially for the sake of her son, who was innocent in all of this. Returning home that day, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The man I had mourned at the wake was now almost unrecognizable. With each discovered secret, the image I had of my husband faded further, replaced by the portrait of a stranger, a man capable of living a double life with startling proficiency. The betrayal felt even deeper as legal documents revealed the extent of Dylan's financial troubles. He had drained our savings to cover debts and support his second family, putting my own financial security in grave danger. As the reality of my new circumstances set in, I realized I was not only mourning a husband, but also facing a future full of uncertainty and legal battles over what little Dylan had left behind. The initial discovery phase of my journey was marked by pain and disbelief. As I braced myself to deal with the legal and emotional fallout of Dylan's double life, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. I was determined to find some semblance of justice and peace, not just for myself, but for all who had been hurt by Dylan's deception. The weeks that followed were consumed by a relentless series of meetings with lawyers and financial advisors as I tried to untangle the complicated financial web Dylan had left behind. Each meeting revealed a new layer of deceit. The depths of his financial mismanagement were worse than I had initially feared. Creditors were relentless, and the assets I thought were secure were now endangered by claims and liens I hadn't known existed. In the midst of this financial chaos, the relationship between Claire and me began to strain. Initially bonded by our shared betrayal, the reality of our situation soon bred tension. We both had significant financial stakes in the outcome of the estate, and while our initial meetings were marked by a shared sense of victimhood, it wasn't long before our interactions took on a more adversarial tone. One particularly heated discussion occurred after a joint meeting with Dylan's estate lawyer. Claire was adamant about securing a trust fund for Ethan, her son, arguing that Dylan had always intended to provide for him. He wanted Ethan to have a good life, to go to college, she argued, her eyes fierce with protective maternal instinct. I understood her position, but with the estate being as leveraged as it was, fulfilling her wish meant that there would be even less to salvage for my own future security. Dylan made promises to both of us, Claire, I countered, my own frustration mounting. We're both trying to make sense of his lies, but we need to be realistic about what's left and what can be done legally. As our legal battles intensified, so did the fallout from Dylan's deception in our personal lives. My family, who had been my support system through the initial shock, began to show signs of frustration. My sister, who had always been quick to offer advice, now often expressed her impatience with the situation. How could you not have known? Weren't there signs? She would ask, her questions like daggers to my already fragile sense of reality. These interactions left me feeling isolated, as if my victimization was somehow my own fault. This sense of isolation was compounded by the loss of friends who withdrew, either uncomfortable with the scandal or swayed by the public gossip that painted both Claire and me in unflattering lights. Amidst this turmoil, the will reading brought no relief. It revealed that Dylan had been draining funds not just for Claire and her son, but also for risky business ventures that had failed without my knowledge. The lawyer's office felt cold and impersonal as the reality set in that Dylan had left both his families not with security, but with impending financial ruin. The battles over the estate stretched on, and with each passing day, my relationship with Claire became more contentious. We were two women, pitted against each other by the actions of a man who had deceived us both, fighting over the scraps of his mistakes. During one particularly tense mediation session, Claire's frustration boiled over. You had him for all those years, Sophia. You had his love, his presence. All Ethan and I had were his promises that you're now trying to take away from us. Her words stung, and in that moment, it became clear that the financial dispute was more than just about money. It was about recognition, about the legitimacy of her and her son's place in Dylan's life, which she felt was being denied. As I drove home from that meeting, the weight of the entire situation felt unbearable. My marriage had been a lie, and now, even in his death, Dylan was managing to tear apart the lives of those he had left behind. The battle for his legacy was becoming a mirror of his own duplicity, each of us, in our way, fighting for what we believed Dylan had intended for us, based on nothing but shadows and promises made in the dark. The conflict with Claire escalated, dragging us deeper into a quagmire of legal disputes and personal grievances. Each meeting left us more drained and distant than the last. Yet, as our legal battles unfolded, a strange twist emerged that neither of us could have anticipated. During a particularly exhaustive session with my lawyer, we uncovered documents that linked Dylan not only to the double life he led with Claire, but also to a series of illegal business dealings that were far more serious than just financial mismanagement. It appeared that Dylan had been involved in money laundering, using his business as a front to wash money for a local criminal organization. This revelation came as a shock, adding a new layer of danger and complexity to our already strained situation. My lawyer advised caution, suggesting we might need to involve the authorities, but also warned of the potential risks to our safety. The criminals involved might not take kindly to their operations being threatened by a legal probe into Dylan's affairs. Faced with this new threat, I reached out to Claire with a proposal to meet outside of our lawyer's presence, hoping to find a resolution that could protect us both. We chose a quiet cafe, a neutral place where we could talk openly. Sitting across from her, I saw not just the woman who shared my late husband's love, but also a fellow victim of his far-reaching deceptions. Claire, I started, the documents from my lawyer spread out between us. We are in deeper trouble than we thought. Dylan was involved in something dangerous, something illegal. We need to decide how we're going to handle this because it's no longer just about money or his estate. Our safety, and your son's safety, might be at risk. Claire's eyes widened as she absorbed the information. I had no idea, she whispered, her voice shaky. I knew Dylan was secretive about his business, but this is something else. We spent hours that day, not as adversaries, but as two women trying to navigate a path out of the chaos Dylan had left behind. We discussed various strategies, from settling the estate quickly and quietly to potentially cooperating with law enforcement if it meant protection from the criminal elements Dylan had entangled us with. This meeting marked a turning point in our relationship. The barriers between us, built on resentment and competition, began to crumble, replaced by a mutual understanding of our shared plight. We agreed to work together moving forward, to protect ourselves and our interests against the looming threats. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Claire and I, along with our legal teams, met frequently, sharing information and planning our next steps carefully. It was during one of these meetings that another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Claire brought in a stack of old letters and emails she had discovered, which included correspondence between Dylan and an unknown associate. These revealed that not only had Dylan been laundering money, but he had also been planning to flee, to start anew, alone. The depth of his betrayal seemed to know no bounds. He had planned to leave us both behind, encumbered with his debts and dangers, while he escaped with his ill-gotten gains. The pain of this discovery was immense, but it also fueled our resolve to bring his true nature to light and seek justice for ourselves and our families. As we prepared to take our findings to the authorities, the reality of our situation sank in. We were about to expose a criminal network that might not hesitate to retaliate. The fear was palpable, but so was our determination to no longer be victims of Dylan's deceitful legacy. Unraveling the truths about Dylan's life was like following a trail in the dark, never knowing where the next turn might lead. But Claire and I, once rivals bound by a man's lies, had found strength in our alliance. Together, we faced the unknown, ready to protect our futures from the shadows of Dylan's past. The deeper Claire and I delved into Dylan's tangled web, the more the danger seemed to close in around us. Our collaboration had turned from cautious allies to a united front, as the stakes had risen far beyond what either of us had anticipated. The reality that we were entangling ourselves with criminals capable of far more than financial deceit was sobering. Our meetings, once filled with the tension of our personal grievances, now bore the gravity of our shared risk. We decided to approach the authorities with the information we had compiled. It was a nerve-wracking decision, but we hoped it would afford us some protection. On the day we met with the detectives, the weight of our decision hung heavy. We sat side by side, presenting the stack of evidence, emails, financial records, and Dylan's communications with unknown associates that pointed unmistakably to criminal activity. The detectives were grave as they took our statements. "You've done the right thing by coming forward," one of them assured us. "But you need to understand, the people involved won't take kindly to this. We'll need to take precautions for your safety." The reality of entering witness protection was discussed, a prospect that was both a shelter and a cage, potentially meaning a complete upheaval of our lives. In the weeks that followed, the tension escalated. I started noticing cars that seemed to linger too long near my house, unfamiliar faces that appeared too often during my daily routines. Paranoia crept into every corner of my life, coloring my days with fear. Claire reported similar experiences, her worry compounded by her responsibility to protect her young son. It was during this time of heightened tension that the confrontation with Claire reached its breaking point. One evening, we met at her house to discuss the latest developments in our case, when an argument broke out. Fueled by fear and stress, Claire suddenly turned on me. "You brought this on us," she exclaimed, her voice fraught with desperation. "If you hadn't pushed to go to the police, we could have handled this quietly. Now, we're in danger every single day because of your choices." The accusation stung, more so because of the sliver of truth it held. I had been the one to suggest going to the authorities, a decision I had thought was right, but now seemed to threaten our very lives. "Claire, I thought I was doing the best thing for both of us," I defended myself, my voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't just sit back knowing what Dylan was involved in. We have kids to think about." "That's just it, Sophia. I have a child to protect, and you've compromised his safety," Claire cut in, her eyes blazing with anger and fear. The argument spiraled, our words laced with the fear and frustration that had been building for months. It ended with Claire asking me to leave, the door closing sharply behind me, a symbolic end to the fragile alliance that had sustained us through our ordeal. As I drove home, the isolation I felt was suffocating. The breach with Claire seemed irreparable, and the path forward lonelier than ever. The reality of our entanglement with Dylan's criminal dealings was now mine to face alone, and the thought of facing both the legal and personal fallout without support was daunting. The following days were some of the darkest. My fears were realized one evening when a brick crashed through my living room window, a stark message tied to it. Stop talking. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Shaken, I realized the full extent of the danger I had exposed myself and my family to. The culmination of fear, betrayal, and isolation was overwhelming. I found myself at a breaking point, questioning every decision that had led me here. The safety of witness protection, once a daunting prospect, now seemed like the only viable escape from the threats that shadowed every aspect of my life. As I prepared for the possibility of disappearing into a new identity, the sacrifices demanded by my choices were stark. I would be leaving behind not just a home, but all semblance of a normal life, a life that Dylan's actions had irrevocably destroyed. The hope for justice was now tinged with the bitterness of its cost, a reminder of the price of truth in a world shadowed by deceit. The weeks following the brick through my window were marked by a chilling clarity. The decision to potentially enter witness protection loomed over me like a dark cloud, its reality pressing down with a weight I hadn't fully anticipated. My interactions with friends and family grew strained, each conversation potentially one of the last in this identity, in this life. Claire and I hadn't spoken since our argument. The break was painful, a reminder of how deeply our brief alliance had been forged in crisis, only to fracture under the same pressure. Despite the rupture, the threat against my life forced me to reconsider reaching out to her. I needed to know if she too had received threats, if her child was safe. I dialed her number with trembling fingers, each ring echoing like a drumbeat in the tense silence of my kitchen. When she answered, her voice was wary, but I could detect an undercurrent of relief when she realized it was me. "Sophia, I'm sorry for how we left things," Claire began, the ice breaking with her words. "I am too," I replied, the relief of reconnection tinged with the anxiety of our shared plight. "Claire, we need to talk. It's not just about us anymore. It's about keeping our families safe." We agreed to meet, this time in a public park, open and filled with the mundane sights of families enjoying the crisp fall air. Sitting on a bench under the sprawling branches of an old oak, we both seemed smaller, wearier. "Claire, have you been threatened?" I asked, not wanting to dance around the dangers that had become all too real. "Yes," she admitted, her face pale, her eyes darting around the park as if expecting a threat to materialize from the shadows. "A letter, no return address, warning me to keep quiet. I haven't gone to the police. I don't know what to do, Sophia." I nodded, understanding her fear all too well. "I received a threat too, a more direct one. Claire, I'm considering witness protection. It's drastic, but I don't see another way to ensure our safety." Claire's reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. "I can't do that, Sophia. I can't just uproot my son, not without trying everything else first." Her decision was one I understood but couldn't share. The stakes were different for each of us, shaped by the contours of our lives, the children we had to protect. We spent the afternoon discussing our options, the conversation meandering through pathways of legal strategies and personal resolutions. Finally, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we found a tentative plan. Claire would seek a more fortified way of life here, perhaps changing her residence and increasing security, while I would proceed with the application for witness protection, a path that would lead me into unknown territory. Leaving the park, I felt a sense of parting that was deeper than geography. Claire and I were about to embark on separate journeys born out of the same tragedy, each of us isolating in our own way. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings with federal agents, and quiet, heart-wrenching farewells. Each step was a severing of ties, a step away from Sophia and towards someone new. The day I left, my house stripped of its memories and packed into nondescript boxes, I felt the finality of my decision. I drove away from everything I knew, each mile a stretch into anonymity. The identity I had forged over a lifetime was left behind, a shell discarded for survival. The new name I carried was light, unburdened by the past, but devoid of the connections that had defined me. In a small town miles away from anyone who knew Sophia, I began anew. The freedom from threat was a cold comfort, the safety a stark cell of isolation. As I settled into my new life, the harsh resolution of my choices settled around me like a shroud. I was safe, yes, but at what cost? The echoes of my old life, of Claire, of Dylan, reverberated in the silence of my solitude, reminders of a resolution born not out of justice, but out of desperate necessity.